So as I was thinking over the last couple weeks about where we've been and where we're headed and what God is doing in our midst, I was reminded of a quote that Chris Woodart, I don't know why I said his name like that. Actually, I do know why, because my Siri is British, and so she says, calling Chris Woodard, and I love it. But Chris Woodard, he reminded me that Mike Tyson gave this quote one time, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Now, I thought about that, and so I researched it, and here's what happened. Just recently, he was interviewed because he's doing some more stuff right now, and he was interviewed about this quote, and he said this. He says, people were asking me before a fight what was going to happen, and they were talking about this guy's style, and he was going to give you a lot of lateral movement. He was going to move. He was going to dance. He was going to do this. He was going to do that, and I said, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. Then, like a rat, they stop in fear and freeze. And I tell you what, 2020 felt like I got punched in the mouth. It felt like I got punched in the gut and the wind got knocked out of me. I don't know if any of you out there can relate, but that's a little bit like it was for me. And if I rewind 2 years ago when I came here, I was really excited. It felt like God had kind of given me this word for our community that he wanted us to begin to live out. It was the word unexplainable. And this word unexplainable was because followers of Jesus are called to live a life that doesn't make sense to people who have not made Jesus Lord of their life. Jesus said incredible things that on the surface sound great, but when you actually try to put them into practice, they're difficult. Like, love your neighbor, but even more so, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. That can be very difficult. When he talks about forgiving 70 times, 7 times, that's hard to really forgive someone over and over and over and over again. The way of Jesus is difficult, and it doesn't make sense if you're not following Jesus. And so we started this series, this vision series, where we looked at what does it actually look like, practically speaking, to follow Jesus. And it's a bunch of people who are reorienting their lives continually around being with Jesus, being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and partnering with Jesus on his mission in community. And so what was really incredible and blew my mind is the way that our community here at LifePoint Church, we got on board. And we were like, yeah, let's do this. Let's really begin to follow Jesus further up and further in. Let's challenge ourselves to be with him through what we like to call the rhythms of intimacy: silence, solitude, prayer, fasting, study, meditation, and so on. People got involved in life groups and began to really form some great communities around them. And what I saw throughout that first year is there was a lot of momentum as we all were trying our best by God's grace to say yes to Jesus and his way. And it was super exciting. And then year 2, I remember we had just finished the Sermon on the Mount, and in our vision message last year, Jesus was coming down the mountain, and the first person that he encountered was a leper, and then a Gentile, and then a woman, 3 categories of people in that day and age who were ostracized, who were excluded, who were overlooked, who were oppressed. And Jesus went to them first, and what you see in the story of the leper is Jesus stretches out his hand. And in the Greek, it's that he stretched his hand out as far as he possibly could to reach out and touch the leper. And what we realize is that you and I, as his followers, we are his hands and his feet, that we are called to be Jesus's outstretched arm. And it was amazing. It felt like we were all together saying, yes, let's go be his outstretched arm. Let's not just have a personal intimacy with Jesus, but let's also live out the love of God for others. It was incredible. And then Ash Wednesday last year, I don't know if you were able to be a part of it or not, but we got to have a worship service together after having fasted all day together as a community. I think it was the first time that as LifePoint we fasted together as a church. And then we just praised Jesus. And if you were there, you know there was something unique and special and powerful about that evening. Because it wasn't just about that night. It wasn't just about that hour. It wasn't just about the songs that we sang or the verses that we read. It was the culmination of what had happened and transpired over the last year and few months of us, by God's grace, saying yes to Jesus and his way. And I was thinking to myself, what's God got in store? What is he about to do in our midst? And I was super excited. And then a couple weeks later, COVID hit our shores and we had to shut down our live in-person gatherings. And it was like a shot to the mouth. And then thing after thing after thing happened in 2020. 2020 really felt like a punch in the mouth. It felt like I was a little bit dazed. I was a little bit confused. It was like, what's going on? And over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten the opportunity, and what it felt like was just kind of step back. It was like the bell rung, and the round was over, and I got to kind of sit in the corner, had my coach, got to rinse my mouth out, and just think through, what's going on? Why was 2020 so difficult? And if that was the case for you, I think the first thing is give yourself a break. It was difficult because it was a really difficult year. Social isolation, that's not good for us as humans. Wearing masks all the time, that's not good for us as humans. We were created to see each other's faces. We were created to interact with people and have relationship with one another. Right? It was hard when you experience the racial tensions and the racial injustice and you saw the riots happening. That's scary. That's hard to go through, to look at the deep wounds in our country and think, how am I a part of this problem? And what can I do to change it? It's hard. And when you look at that election that we had, that was super divisive, it's hard. We had a really tough year. That's part of the reason that it was hard for all of us, because we were having to do things that are really difficult and not the way that we were created to live. And part of it is because many of our coping mechanisms were stripped from us. That we, throughout our lives, have developed all these great coping mechanisms so we won't have to deal with the things that are really underneath, right? All these crutches that we have in our life, and they were just kicked out from under us. All these ways of escaping and numbing and distracting, right? They just didn't work like they used to work, and we began to have to confront all of the stuff that was under the surface. And part of the reason that it was hard was many of us, myself included, we had trouble during 2020 continually reorienting our lives around Jesus and his way. It was harder, it felt like, to continue in the disciplines of the faith. It was harder, definitely, to live in community as Jesus did. It was harder to figure out, what do we do now? It felt like, anybody fans of Batman? Yeah, anyone? So there are two kinds of people in the world, fans of Batman and people who are wrong, and that's okay. So fans, if you're a fan of Batman, Batman has this yellow thing that he wears. What is it called? Utility belt, yeah. And it gets him out of everything. He always has some ingenious gadget that will get him out of whatever problem he's about to experience. And I feel like as a church, we have these two weapons in our utility belt, and that's community and food. Right? And when those were taken away from us, we didn't know what to do. If we can't gather together and eat, it's like we can't function. And I get it. But it was really hard to do the disciplines of the faith, the rhythms of intimacy, to engage with Jesus in the ways that we had been engaging with him. And what happens is the result of not walking in Jesus' footsteps leads to difficulty. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And the way that you experience this peace that he talks about that you can't even understand, this joy that is abounding, this hope that is foundational and secure, this contentment that, isn't changed by our circumstances. Jesus lived a life that led to that experience. And we don't live that life, when you don't walk in those footsteps, it's really hard. And for many of us, that was part of the reason 2020 was so hard. Now, not all of us had a really rough 2020. And if you didn't, that's awesome. Continue in the way that you're going. But if it was rough, it was difficult, perhaps there's something in the way that Jesus lived his life that would be helpful for us. I believe that Jesus structured his life in a certain way to demonstrate for us how we are called as humans to live our life. And it started with the fact that Jesus lived his life in crowds of people. If you read through the Gospels, what you'll find all the time is the word crowds. Multitudes, whether he was up on a mountain or in a valley or in a town or a village or walking by the way, people were coming out of the woodworks to be near Jesus, to be with Jesus, to listen to him, because he was teaching with authority that no one had ever heard before. And they were excited about it. There were people that were sick, people that had diseases, people that were possessed by demons that were coming to him to get healed, to get set free, to have life for the first time. And Jesus would heal them. So he was surrounded by crowds, but they weren't just people. They weren't just crowds of people. It wasn't just a random group of people. They were people who were interested in the way of God, the kingdom of heaven. They were interested in Jesus. They wanted to hear more. They wanted to learn more. They wanted to experience more of Jesus. So he was surrounded by people that were about the kingdom of heaven. But then you see this happen. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 says this: seeing the crowds, he, Jesus, went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. So crowds come around Jesus, and he separates himself from the crowds. Matthew 8:18. Now, when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go up to the other side of the lake or of the sea. And then in verse 23, it says, when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. Once again, Jesus experiences a crowd and he leaves the crowd. Mark 6:30. The apostles returned to Jesus. He had just sent 72 of them out to go do ministry, and they come back from doing ministry, and they told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. Can you relate to that? Has your life ever been that busy that you skipped lunch, you skipped dinner, you forgot, you couldn't even eat? There were so many people that needed your time and attention. Mothers of young kids, you can relate, I know, right? Your life is just busy. It's inundated with people. It's inundated with stuff. And you're so busy, you can't even do the things that your body needs, like eat or sleep. And so what did Jesus do? He said, hey, let's come away to a place by ourselves where we can regather our rest, our strength. And what's interesting to me about these passages of Scripture is Jesus was saying no to needy people, which doesn't sound much like Jesus, does it? Jesus saying no to needy people? Right? There were people that needed to be healed, people that needed demons cast out, people that needed teaching that was authoritative and true and life-giving, and yet Jesus often said no because he knew in his humanity he needed time with his community. Jesus had a community of about 16 to 20 people, right? He had the 12 disciples that he chose, and then there were other, men and women that were disciples, right? Whenever you see the 12 in Scripture, that's the certain group of 12, but when you see the word disciples, that's just a smaller group of people that were into Jesus in his way and would get in the boat when he got in the boat, and would go to the other side when he went to the other side. And he lived his life in this community of people. But he didn't just separate from the crowds and live life in community. He also did this. Matthew chapter 17, verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John his brother, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. Right? Sometimes he would separate from even his community, a smaller community, and be with 3 particular guys, Peter, James, and John. Verse 2, and he was transfigured before them. They got to see Jesus transfigured, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became white as light. Verse 9, and as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, tell no one the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. Jesus allowed three guys to see things differently, to have unique experiences with Jesus that were only for them, at least for a while. He said, you got to experience this, and I don't want you to tell anyone about this until later after I've risen from the grave. It seems odd. Why wouldn't he want the other disciples to, his community, to experience this? Why wouldn't he want them to tell them about it yet? Because there's a unique space that Jesus knows that we need, and that's just a couple people. There's a time when he raised a girl from the dead and invited those three in to see it, but only those three. And then you have Mark chapter 14, verse 32. And when they went to a place called Gethsemane, right? Jesus is about to be betrayed. He's about to be crucified, and he's going to this garden to pray. And he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And then he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. See, he took these three guys into this incredibly vulnerable space for him. Right? He was distressed unto death. In another place, it says he was sweating drops of blood. That's how stressed out he was. And he invited these three guys to be in that intimate place with him and know him a little bit more deeply than the rest of his community. But then oftentimes, he would even separate from them. Matthew chapter 14. Immediately, this is after he fed the 5,000 miraculously, immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. What you see throughout the Gospels is Jesus being in crowds, but then separating from the crowds and being with his community, and then separating from his community and just being with his three disciples, Peter, James, and John, and then even times when he would separate from them and be alone with the Father and the Spirit, because in his humanity, he knew he needed to cultivate that relationship. Jesus was guided by the Spirit. He was empowered by the Spirit. He lived his life by the Spirit of God. And the way he was able to do that is through cultivating that relationship. Jesus is fully God, but he's also fully human. And when he lived some 30-some years on the planet, he set aside his divine privileges and lived a completely and utterly human life. And the only way he could do the incredible things he did was because he was filled with and empowered by the Spirit of God. And he took time to cultivate that. In fact, in Luke chapter 5, verse 15, it says this, the news about him, Jesus, spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Jesus knew he needed that space of just intimacy with the Father and the Spirit. And what I find when I look at Jesus' life is that there were these certain spaces that Jesus had intentionally, ways that he structured his life in regards to people so that he could live and then demonstrate a life that is helpful in us following after Jesus. And the first thing and the most important thing, because this space is the foundation and the fuel for his life and for our life, and that's that personal time alone with the Father and the Son and the Spirit, right? When we get away by ourselves in silence and solitude and prayer and studying Scripture and meditating on Scripture, right? Getting away, living in the rhythms of intimacy, that's the foundation and fuel for our lives. And it's in that space where God does his best work of transformation. James talks about how one day we're going to be mature and complete, lacking nothing. I obviously am already there, but the rest of us have to get there. No, I'm not even close. But where God does his best work of maturing me, where he puts me on the potter's wheel and molds me, is in those spaces of personal intimacy with him. But here's the thing. That sounds great But that's difficult to do. It takes discipline. It takes willpower. It takes motivation. And just like January 1st, I get motivated to change my life and have all these new resolutions and change the way that I'm living. And then February 1st, I find that I live just like December 31st. Can anyone relate to that? Every once in a while, you get really excited about something. My wife and I used to do a lot of driving in the car, and she hated it because in the car, I'm driving, and I get all these ideas about ways that I need to change and we need to change and things we need to do differently, and I'd be sharing all these exciting ideas, and then I would never implement all this stuff. Right? And then she would have to hear it over and over again, and nothing would ever change because it's hard. Change is hard. It's hard to stay motivated. It's hard to have willpower. It's hard to do those things that are disciplines. And so what do? Is then we have to surround ourselves with people that are helpful in our journey towards Jesus. Hebrews 12:1 talks about being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And because of that, we lay aside sin and we lay aside the weights that are holding us back. See, I can get motivated, but if I don't have anyone encouraging me, challenging me, and inspiring me, then I just slowly drift back to what is comfortable, to what is easy, to what comes natural to me, to escape, to distraction, to numbing, right? That's just kind of where I travel to. And so Jesus had this second space with a couple different guys, a couple different people who knew him more deeply, more intimately. This, in our life, these would be our pace setters. Anybody like to watch the Olympics? I like to watch the Olympics, love the Summer Olympics, all kind of exciting things at the Summer Olympics. One thing that is not exciting is long distance runs in the Olympics. I don't know if you watch that. If you do, more power to you. I don't. I'll watch the highlights, but what I found is that in a long distance run in the Olympics, you will have all the people that have, worked really hard and, had the good enough times that could be in the race, but there's also another person who runs the race with them and isn't competing, but will run the first couple laps. And they're called a pace setter. And what they do, their job, some people are professional pace setters. What they do is they know what it's like to run at a certain pace. So if this group is trying to set an Olympic record or a world record, the pace setter will run the first couple laps at Olympic record pace or at world record pace so that you can have a physical representation of what it looks like to not run too fast or to run too slow. Right? If you run too fast, you'll run out of gas and you won't be able to keep up that pace. If you run too slow, you'll get behind. You won't be able to catch up and sprint fast enough at the end. And so you have a pace setter that shows you the way. And what we need to have people in our life who are pace setters, people who will help us stay on pace, like a workout buddy, someone who will encourage you when you don't want to get up and exercise, when you don't want to do the things that are helpful for you or beneficial to you or bring life to you. You need a pace setter in your life. Now, maybe you're a fan of the 4x4 400-meter relay. Right, this is an incredible relay in the Olympics. And the reason I like it so much is because Baylor, where I went to school, that was one thing we were really good at. Baylor was really good at the 4x400-meter relay race because we had one of the greatest 400-meter coaches ever. His name was Clyde Hart. And he coached the greats like Michael Johnson, Jeremy Warner, who wore the gold shoes. I don't know if you guys saw him in the Olympics, but he's running a few different Olympics. But what Coach Hart would do, I had a friend on the team and I was asking him about kind of how did he do this? One of the things that he did was he had all of these markers set out for when you were running. And at these markers, there would be these beeps that you could hear. So when the beep sounded, that meant you were supposed to be at the next marker. And if you weren't quite there yet, you had to speed up your pace. And if you had already passed it, maybe you needed to slow down your pace. But it taught you how to run at the appropriate pace so that you kind of get it ingrained in how fast am I supposed to run. But brilliantly, what he would do is every practice or every 5 or 6 practices, he would speed up the beeps, so that you would learn to not rest and get comfortable where you were, but to continue to go faster and continue to go faster and continue to push yourself. It's like if you have some sort of workout program and let's say you're trying to build muscle. Well, what you'll do is you won't do the same thing every time. You won't continue with the same weight at the same number of reps. You'll either increase the weight or maybe you'll decrease the weight and increase the reps because you're trying to confuse your muscles. You're trying to get your muscles to continue to not get comfortable. And so what we need in our life are people like that, a couple of people that know us really deeply, really well, and can encourage, challenge, and inspire us to run to Jesus faster because we can't do it on our own. People who will continually get in our life and help us run faster to Jesus. And we need a community of people to live our life with, just like Jesus did, right? These 16 to 20 people, these 12, 13, 14 people who we're just living life with. We eat meals with, we watch ball games with, we go shopping with, we talk about the weather with, right? Just people we're living life with, talking about our hopes and dreams with. We need to have people surrounding us, but not just any people, but people who love Jesus and are also trying to run to Jesus together, people that we can be on mission with. But then we also need to have a space where there's a whole bunch of us just worshiping Jesus together. Good news is that space is taken care of. That's this space right here. Sunday mornings when we gather together and we praise Jesus and we listen to the Word of God. But we need to have these structures in our life to help us so that we can actually follow through with walking in Jesus' footsteps. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself, okay, that seems crazy. That's impossible. That is unrealistic. There's no way. I don't have any time in my life. How in the world could I possibly begin to add all of these things, to join a life group, to join a discipleship triad? Like, come on, Brady. What in the world? There's no way I can do this. Just a couple things that will be helpful. First thing is this. Jesus continually, if you look at his life and you look at the way that he spoke to people, he just continues to give people permission to be where they're at. We are all on a journey, and we're not at the end of the journey. We're not all mature and complete, lacking nothing. We're somewhere before that. And Jesus continually gives permission to be where you're at. It's okay. You're where you're at. You're not there yet. That's okay. You're here, you're not there, and it's okay to be here. That's okay. Secondly, Jesus understands that there are different life stages and that we all have different responsibilities. Some of those responsibilities are responsibilities that God has given to us. Jesus was a first century itinerant Jewish rabbi, meaning what he did was he traveled around for a living and he didn't have a car payment, didn't have a house payment, he didn't have a spouse, he didn't have kids. Well, he adopted a lot of people, billions of them, but he didn't have any biological kids. So he lived a different type of life that many of us aren't going to ever live, and that's okay. He understands that. He gets that. Some of us are parents. Some of us are single. Some of us are grandparents and the kids have already left and we have a different amounts of time. Some of us just had a kid and we have a baby that every 2 hours needs our attention, needs to be fed, right? I mean, it's different for all of us and that's okay. Your journey with Jesus will look different than mine will. In fact, your journey with Jesus will look different than your journey with Jesus 10 years from now or 10 years ago. And that's okay. When you think about all of these structures that you need to have in your life, just take a breath and know that it will look different in different life stages, and that's okay. One thing that I love that Howard Schultz talked about in his book when he was talking about how he did Starbucks and how made it this, huge empire, is he talked about 1%. He was always asking his team and asking his leaders to ask their teams, how can we be 1% better today? What does 1% look like? Not 10%, not 100%. Change is hard. What's 1%? So if you find yourself on the journey where you're at and you think about, man, I'm this amount busy. I have this many responsibilities. Great. Don't look for complete and utter change by tomorrow. Just think, what's 1%? What's one thing I can do differently that would pattern my life better or more accurately to the way of Jesus? One thing. And then this to me should be really comforting. when you look at all these structures and you look at the crowds and you look at community and you look at the three, that little discipleship group that Jesus had, and you look at the alone time, it's likely that you already have all of those spaces in your life already. Just think about it. Crowds, got it, check. Community, you probably already live your life alongside people. Maybe it's your close friends, maybe it's your extended family, but you probably live your life with people. Discipleship group, you probably already have a couple of best friends. People that are the first people that you share with when things go great, or the first people you share with when things are really difficult. The people that you cry with, the people that you complain to, the people that have been with you for a long period of time. You probably already have that space in your life, people that are close to you. But if you're anything like me, you tend to surround yourself with people who don't challenge you. They just accept you where you're at, and they just accept you where you're at, and just accept you where you're at. See, what we need is we need people in our life in those spaces that, yes, accept us where we're at, but say, I love you too much to let you stay there. I want to help you into more, into better, into that abundant life that Jesus talks about. And so what you can do is maybe you just look at the spaces that you already have in your life, and maybe you say, how can I shake things up a bit? How can I help these groups of people to be more intentional, to be more deliberate, to be more encouraging towards Jesus? It doesn't mean that we have to be doing Bible studies 24/7. Maybe you keep doing the things that you're doing, but maybe you do them in a different way. Perhaps you add in a little bit of encouragement, challenging. Maybe you ask some harder questions. But maybe 1% for you is just kind of shaking things up. And maybe it's asking your closest friend, saying, hey, would you mind challenging me a little bit this year or this week or this month? Here's something that I want to change in my life. Will you challenge me in that? Will you ask me about that? Will you help me run faster to Jesus? But maybe as you evaluate your different spaces, you think, oh my, I have people that there's no way I could shake things up. There's no way they'd encourage me. There's no way they'd challenge me in that way. Maybe you need to kind of change some of the people that are in your life if that's the case for you. But realize when you're allocating your time, you likely already have those spaces, and maybe you just need to be a little bit more intentional in those spaces. You know, if you already have great biblical community, I'm not going to say you need to also join a life group at LifePoint. The reason we created life groups was if you don't have that already, if you don't have people surrounding you, encouraging, challenging, inspiring you to walk faster towards Jesus. That's why we have those. Same with discipleship triads. If you already have two best friends in your life that are continually challenging you, asking you hard questions, pointing you to Jesus, then you don't need to join a triad. That's what a triad is for. It's for those of you who don't have that. We want to provide that for you, help you get connected to people like that. But here's one thing that I learned last night about all this. I had an experience that I've never had before. When we got back from vacation, my wife decided to do a juice cleanse. And I don't know if you know anything about juice cleanses. I don't, because they sound really hard, and I don't want to do that. That sounds super hard. But she wanted to do that. Here's the problem. We had signed up for this thing, this service where they send you food, or they send you like groceries, and then they have all the recipes for you, and you make it. There's things like Blue Apron or HelloFresh. Maybe you've heard about those things. We like it because you don't have to grocery shop, and they provide the exact amount of ingredients that you need, and there's no leftovers. We're bad at leftovers. We just are. We tried to change. We can't. So we just realized it's better if we don't have leftovers. So we started making these meals, these HelloFresh meals, together, but we forgot to cancel the order. So when Jennifer started on this juice cleanse, we had all these meals that needed to be made. Now, here's the thing. I used to think that I knew how to cook when I would scramble eggs or bake brownies. I learned last night that's not cooking. It's not even close to cooking. That's like nice and fun, and it's a bunch of sugar. It's great. It's fantastic. Cooking is really hard, because last night I had to cook the meal by myself. And it was crazy. If you're not good at multitasking, you're not good at cooking. And I'm not good at multitasking. Maybe it's because I'm a guy, or maybe it's just because I'm me, but it's awful. Because you had to have 4 things going at once, and they're all having to do with fire. And you had things frying, you had things boiling, you had things baking. I was chopping things. I was stripping leaves off a plant. Like, what am I doing? Do you eat this? Is this poisonous? I don't know. But I was just following the directions. I had 4 different timers going on, and I was stressed out of my mind. I know why Gordon Ramsay is angry all the time and yelling at people, because cooking is super stressful. It's not like when you're watching a cooking show and they have all the things already measured out. And it's like, oh, we'll just add this in here, whatever, how much it is. Someone measured it for me, some intern. No, you have to measure it yourself. You've got to cook it yourself. You have to stir it yourself. You have to chop it yourself. You have to bake it yourself. And it's all supposed to come out at the same time. That did not happen last night. I had food that was too hot, food that was too cold. It was crazy. Here's the thing. You know what I learned? I learned a couple things. One thing I learned is that if you're not cooking with a lot of butter, it's probably not going to taste good. I felt like Julia Childs. There was so much butter going on last night. It was crazy. Every meal should be called something with butter, but it's not, because you don't want it to sound unhealthy. My wife's on a juice cleanse. I'm on a butter cleanse. It's the same thing, right? Here's what I learned. I learned that when I used to think that we cooked this meal together, I was an idiot. Because my wife was cooking the meal and I was doing basically nothing. I mean, she would ask me to do something here and there, and I thought, oh man, I'm cooking. No, I was not. I was not, because now I've cooked and I know that is a very different experience. Also, you know what? I used to be really proud of myself because I would do the dishes. I'm such a good husband. She'd cook and I'd do the dishes. That is not equal. It is not equal at all. It's not even close to equal. Dishes is easy. Cooking is hard. Okay, so if you're a husband and you do dishes, that's awesome. Do that. That's amazing. Just don't be proud of yourself for that. Okay? That's not the same. That's hard. So I realized a lot of things that were mostly bad about myself. One thing I realized was I was not ready to cook. I'm not to that level yet. My skill level has not achieved cooking level status. I'm still just above baking right now, okay? I'm just about bacon and eggs right now, which is fine, because Ron Swanson survived on bacon and eggs. If he can do it, I can do it. Cooking is a little bit above my league, out of my league. But here's the thing. When I relate this back to these structures, and I relate this to the way of Jesus, first thing is that you're not alone. Cooking alone is hard, but as you begin to step out and venture out into the way of Jesus, you have got the Spirit of God inside of you who is helping you, empowering you, guiding you, moving you more towards God. You're not on your own. Secondly, last night, although Jennifer wasn't cooking with me or for me, she was there in the kitchen. And when I had trouble, she gave me some guidance and some advice. And when I was frustrated, she encouraged me. And when I didn't know what to do, she helped me a little bit. She didn't do it for me, but she came alongside me and helped me stay the course of the really hard thing that I was doing. And I needed that because I couldn't have done it without her. And the last thing that I learned, and this might be the most important thing, is when I cut into that pork tenderloin with this apple mustard compote on top of it, and I took a bite, it was worth it. All that hard work, all that stress, all that frustration, it was worth it. I think about Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John had less time than the rest of the disciples. They did. They had less free time to play cards or to watch professional football or whatever else they did back then in that day that Matthew got to do and Judas got to do, Bartholomew got to do. Like, they had less time than those disciples who were his community. And they had less time than the crowds because they had said yes to Jesus. And that's just the reality. As you begin to say yes to Jesus, you will have a little bit less time. But here's the thing. Peter, James, and John got to see a girl raised from the dead. Peter, James, and John got to see Jesus transfigured before their eyes, and Moses and Elijah show up. And Peter, James, and John got to see Jesus be vulnerable and needy. And they got to be there for Jesus. And I guarantee if you ask Peter, if you ask James, if you ask John today, was it worth it to have less time? Was it worth it to have to invest more? I guarantee they would say absolutely. It's worth it. Following in Jesus' footsteps is hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Imagine the bell has rung. The round is over. You're sitting in the corner and you get to kind of look at what just transpired. You got punched in the mouth. You got punched in the gut. You know, you're winded. Things are a little bit disoriented. But you have a chance to relook at your plan. And you know what I love about that Mike Tyson quote? Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. He said that before he fought Evander Holyfield in 1997. And I don't know if you know this story, but Evander Holyfield beat Mike Tyson in that fight. Even though Mike Tyson bit part of his ear off. Right? He got punched in the face. He got his ear bitten off. He was disoriented. But his plan worked because it was a good plan. And as we think about following in Jesus' footsteps, being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, partnering with Jesus on his mission in community, it's a good plan. It's okay to step back and evaluate. But we got to go back in the ring. And we can't wait for it to be an easy round with no COVID, right? We've got to live our lives even when it's difficult. And so how are you going to enter back into the ring? If you don't have good community, let us help you find community. If you don't have a couple people who are helping disciple you, let us help you do that. One of the ways that we do that are discipleship triads. We're about to have another discipleship triad launch in February. And if you don't know what that is and you want to sign up for that, we would love to get you to sign up. The way that we do that is, and here are the slides that I made, go to our website, lifepointqcy.org. Select on the Connect tab, and then select Discipleship Triads. And that will take you to a page where you can click Sign Up, and we'll get you involved in that. It's not perfect. It's not the greatest thing ever, but it's a helpful way for you to begin to run faster towards Jesus together with people who will be in it with you. We need people to help us. We can't do it on our own. There's a reason Jesus lived his life the way that he did and lived it as an example for us to follow. Remember, all of these things that we do, they're not to earn God's favor. We can't earn God's favor because we already have it. Jesus earned God's favor for us. It's not to make God like you. He already likes you. He's already for you. It's just the way that leads to deeper intimacy, more life, more joy, more peace, more hope, more contentment. It's the way of Jesus.